Hello, everyone. Welcome to Code Talk Teach. This is our bi-weekly talk show that we do here at Oasis Digital. Usually Kyle Cortis is the one who is welcoming you, but he had another conflict today, so I'm stepping in for the moment. I'm Lance Finney. I'm a tech lead with Oasis Digital, and I'll introduce the rest of the team, or actually let them introduce themselves.
I guess I can go first. I'm Zachary Kipping. I'm just another developer with Oasis Digital.
I'm Chris Harden, also a developer at Oasis Digital.
Yeah, we've all been with Oasis Digital for 3+ years in the Angular world. We're instructors with Angular Bootcamp. We've worked together for a while and seen a lot of Angular in our time. So eventually, we are going to talk about cheat codes to finish this week's software development. But we're not going to start with that. We're going to do what we normally do and have a couple other conversations just about little things in the tech world. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is my car. Because several months ago when we had, during one of these sessions, one of our initial sessions was to brag about my car. I had just bought a Chevy Bolt, which is a small electric car, a lot cheaper than a Tesla, not nearly as cool as the Tesla. But hey, Kyle's here now. But it worked out really well for us. Well, there's a problem with these things. And we got a recall notice yesterday because apparently there are two different manufacturing flaws in the battery pack. And if you are unlucky enough to have both of those battery manufacturing flaws, your car will spontaneously burst into flames while you're not using it. Just like in the middle of the night, people will come out and like there'll be a bonfire in their backyard where their garage used to be. So they say they have a fix coming. What their recommendation is not to charge it fully, not to let it discharge fully, and to, when you're done charging, park it outside at least 50 feet from any other vehicle. We can do some of those things. We're not going to do all of them. It's been a happy little car for us. We just know that it's new technology and things aren't perfect. We haven't had any problems yet, but maybe we have those flaws just sitting there in the battery pack that will hit us on some random day, and maybe we won't. And hopefully they'll have a fix soon enough and they'll be able to check for the flaws and we'll never find out.
That's what I was about to ask, if they could actually check for the flaws yet, because at this point you're sitting there with, I don't know if I have the flaws, or...
Yeah. Well, the initial recall was for the earlier model years, and they said that the model year that we bought was fine and didn't have it.
Oh,
and then a couple of the cars in our model year have had this problem. So they claim to know what the problem is, and we hope they're right. I don't know. So yeah, it's interesting. Like there are places now that will say like there are charging stations around that will say, have signs up that say you cannot bring in, you cannot park a Chevy Bolt there and things like that. Yeah,
hey,
or
serious.
parking garage that prohibit Chevy Bolts. But actually, internal combustion engine cars are more likely to burst into flames than the Bolt. The difference is that happens when you're driving it. Not when
on the
it's
road
just
while you're
sitting
moving.
in the garage.
When you notice.
Yeah. Like I in my life, I have seen several burning vehicles on the side of the road as I'm driving. Those
I've
all
seen
had
many.
gas engines. Yeah.
I've probably seen at least 20 cars engulfed in flame in my life.
All things considered, though, it'd be nicer to have it burst into flames while you're driving it, because you can just kind of like park it on the side of the road and let it just burn, versus like burning your entire house down.
That does seem worse.
Yeah.
But hasn't that happened with some Teslas too, though? Like burning houses down? Or at least one?
There was something in China or something that happened, but it wasn't clear if it was like from the factory or if it was like a unauthorized third-party repair or something.
Okay. So I thought there was like one in California. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, there's some California thing where somebody like ran over some giant piece of metal, and if you run over a giant piece of metal and destroy either a battery or a gas tank, you're going to have a very bad day.
That doesn't work for any type of car, really.
No, running over a big enough piece of metal to damage either of those things is a bad.
Yeah. No, this one was August 5th. A California couple said their Tesla Model S caught fire while charging in the garage overnight, and then it caught their second Tesla on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, weird. Have not followed it to know the veracity.
Yeah, so that's the little bit of tech news in my world. It hopefully doesn't actually ever matter, but we'll find out.
So I guess my tech news is that my Tesla has, as far as I know, no significant risk of catching fire in the middle of the night.
It's
Right.
good.
Lance, was there any like indication that they're like, can they like tell from serial numbers, like if yours is a problem specifically, or is it just like you have to wait and see? Or
I think we just have to wait for our turn to go into the dealer, and then hopefully they can do the right diagnostics. They might have to crack open the battery pack and look and see if, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's even a visually recognizable flaw, or if it's just something embedded in the, the chemicals. I really don't know. So for the time being, we have a cute little car that's great for driving around town, and hope we do not have a bonfire.
well, I don't have any similarly exciting kind of things going on in the world of tech, but I did just watch the, I guess, kickoff live stream for the Lit library, not framework library version 2. I guess a different group at Google than the Angular group that that we've had more interaction with, of course, with a very cool technology, really impressive. It's kind of wild. They have two like somewhat competing things, from teams at the same company, but I don't know. It looked really interesting, looked really impressive. They're obviously continuing to invest heavily in it. I don't know. I'm kind of excited to try it for something. I think we actually have used its predecessor Lit element we used for something small a while back. I think we might have had a customer team that's like very deep in Lit at one point, but I don't know. I'd like to try it myself.
You say 2. Is it really only 2?
Well, there's the two big ones, right? So Angular and Lit are the two big ones. But a company that big, there's probably several other competing things. I know there's at least one major internal one that's like I don't even know its name, but it's like connected to a bunch of other Google technology, and it has apparently some other interesting advantages. But it's since it's connected to all their other internal technology, it's not out there.
Or
I'm sure there's more.
Isn't Flutter another one, or is that a different category?
Yeah, that's. I mean, they have a way to like compile Flutter to, what do you call that thing? WebAssembly, I guess. But it's not. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of like Angular keeps working on better compilation. Lit keeps working on getting smaller to be little tiny runtime executable. Whereas Flutter is like, here is a gigantic block of WebAssembly that you can run. So I don't think Flutter is really like intended for making websites yet. Maybe ever. I don't know. Any other exciting tech going on, Chris or Zachary?
One thing that did happen within the last week was the NXConf. So
yeah, that was great.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, there's the meta tech of how they ran it. So they ran it on YouTube, which made it easier to deal with in some ways. And so the videos are just out there. You can go watch them. They haven't chopped them up into individual videos yet. So if you want to see Manfred Steyer's talk or whatever, you have to figure out where it is during the day. But it's all out there. Narwhal's doing well with their promotions and with their technology. It's pretty cool.
So I think I saw some hints. I think they actually use StreamYard, which is same thing we use for this. I think they use to run that. They had some pretty significant technical problems. A couple of their folks kept having serious audio problems, and then several of the talks they had a upstream bandwidth issue. And so I heard them mention a couple times along the way that I think some of the talks were pre-recorded. And so they were going to re-upload the pre-recording to YouTube. So if you haven't watched the stream yet and you're a little bit patient, you'll probably have a better viewing experience than those of us who watched it live. But yeah, they're doing great. NX anyway is just doing great. I really love how just more and more useful capabilities keep popping in there. I have greatly enjoyed the increasing ease of upgrading with it over time.
Yeah, I watched probably about half the conference, but none of it live because I always had meetings. And so end of the day, I was kind of cherry picking and fast forwarding to the specific talks that I wanted to see. So I missed some of the problems that you were mentioning just because I didn't happen to hit those times.
Yeah, I think Brandon had a recurring audio feed problem. I think he eventually like swapped out a microphone or something. I don't know. If you think enterprise development is hard, try making audio and video work on a live stream. I mean, that's what's really
Like, anything that can go wrong in a live event usually goes wrong in a live event.
always goes wrong. Okay, well, let me see here. I should kick off our real topic, our primary topic. Let me make sure I get my announcement. I try to actually look at the announcement to not miss anything important. So the thing that was promised to our viewers was, so there's this tendency in software development for everything to take longer than it's supposed to, for nothing to ever get done on time, for every time you think you're signed up for a week's worth of work in a week, but it's like, dragging past the end of the week is dragging past to the end of the day. And I would say compared to most organizations I have ever seen, most teams I've ever seen, I would say as a group, we at Oasis Digital are really good at actually like getting things done in a timely way. And I thought if we just kind of go over some of the tips, techniques, tricks, anything else that we use to try to, get done on time, to deliver the thing we're supposed to deliver, without, working on it all night, without working on it all weekend, that kind of thing. There could possibly be some tips of value to our viewers. So I think I sent some stuff out in a chat that we can go through if we run out of live ideas. But if anybody has any thoughts, techniques, technology, process, anything.
Well, the first idea that comes to mind is kind of the anti-pattern. If you need to get things out quickly, that doesn't mean ignore your tests. In the short term, if the only thing you need to do is get this thing out today and then you never have to think about it, that's fine. But if you ignore your tests or ignore your process, you are going to pay for it at some point.
Yeah.
So it just, when I hear, there's so many times I've heard people say, yeah, we never really did tests because we needed to get things out the door. And just like, yeah, that is short-term gain, long-term huge loss. And so I'm just getting out here upfront saying, if you hear what Kyle's talking about and you think the answer is going to be, don't do the things to make sure you have your code quality, that's not the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a list of just, I'm taking here notes of a list of ideas we came up with, but based on that, I'm definitely making a list of ideas we are not advocating.
Right.
Skipping doing a good job is not a good strategy to get done on time.
I have something along, so I'm really not a test, what do you call it, test first, where you write the test and then you write the code. I'm not into that at all. But when you are doing these things, sometimes it's good to identify like, oh, I'm putting this bit of business logic in here. My kind of normal trajectory would be to like keep running the app and seeing if it's working. And then I have to realize, oh no, this is a really good candidate it'll be much faster for me to write a unit test to make sure this little bit of logic works before I try to load it in the browser and have those additional cycles of rebuilding the Angular app and stuff like that. So like picking out which pieces will be faster to prototype like in the running app versus which parts are a little bit of logic. Like, hey, I have to manipulate this data and change some strings or whatever. I can iterate on that much more quickly in a unit test. Whereas some things, I don't feel that way about other things. Like, well, I want the view to look a certain way. Some stuff I find it easier to rapidly prototype actually in the running app, and some things are more appropriate for the unit test first. So identify which is fastest,
I really like that idea of like choosing the right size chunk to develop or test can really speed you up. I have watched people work where they go through like an entire test dev environment deployment cycle of 10 to 15 minutes to check one little piece of logic, and they can basically make 4 attempts at editing this line of code per hour. And that is a terrible way to go home on time and not be late for happy hour. Yeah, so like working in a way where you can like iterate on a little chunk without waiting a long time, and then only take a hit for a longer delay for a bigger pile of work definitely pays off to get done.
And another area that is the same basic principle is true, but it's not unit testing, is using something like Storybook. So that if you are trying to do some UI prototyping, having a playground like Storybook, and their Angular Playground and other versions, is a really great thing. Now, one aspect of that is if you are in your time crunch, and you don't have Storybook in place, it's not going to save you time to try to figure out how to get Storybook up and running and learn the techniques and the technology and then start using it. So really, if you want to have that available to you so that you can do quick prototyping, you need to learn how to use those things and get those into your process before it's the time crunch. Because otherwise, you're just going to be spinning your wheels at the exact wrong time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another, that's a really great broad pattern. Setting up your stuff like in advance, just sort of like follow a standard path, just wire up all the stuff you're going to need so that it's there when you need it, means you will go fast when you're under pressure. And like deciding not to set up Storybook because I don't need it yet, and then not setting it up when you do need it because you don't have time, those are both ways to be stuck working a weekend.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the old joke of, the house has a leaking roof and the nagging wife. It's a sexist joke. It's what you hear. The nagging wife says, "Hey, husband, go fix the roof." And he says, "It's not raining right now. Why would I need to fix it?" And then the next day, "Hey, husband, you fix the roof." "Well, it's raining right now. I can't go fix it when I'm in the rain." If you take that approach that, it's either I don't need it right now, so I'm not going to do it, or I need it too much right now, so I can't do it, you're never going to get there. Of course, on the exact opposite extreme is you can get people who are so focused on having every single tool and technology set up that they spend all of their time setting up their environments and never actually getting around to producing anything.
So I'm going to tie back to our pre-topic here, Lance, and give a big shout out to our buddies at Norwal.
Yeah.
And say, now this is only relevant for using tools that they support, which is like React, Angular. That's kind of what they mostly have in the box, Nest, Node. But if you can adopt an off-the-shelf set of tooling where you just hit the button and it just gives you all the setup you need to have a place to write the different kinds of tests, a place to have Storybook just ready to go when you need it, that is an amazing tool for leaving work on time. And like skipping those things, saying, "Oh, I'm just going to start with the basics. I'm going to hand roll a roll-up config for this project because I don't need an official CLI yet." That's a recipe to be caught in a time crunch. When you don't, then you won't have time to set up the tooling. You'll desperately need the tooling, and you will not deliver in a timely way. You will be stuck doing extra work.
I've gotten to the point, NX is so easy that even when it's like, oh, I need to write, a couple Node scripts to transform some files or something, like, I don't need NX for that, but why would I spur around trying to remember how to get that set up? A couple NX commands, I'm there, I don't have to think about it.
So like a TypeScript Node thing, if I want TypeScript and Node to work. Yeah, I mean, I'd say
a couple 5-line scripts in TypeScript, I'll still use NX because why the hell not?
Yeah, I mean, especially like an internal tool where like having an extra dependency is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right? Like bits are cheap and human labor is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. I know exactly how to do it. It's the same commands I use every day. And in 5 seconds later, I've got something running and I'm only worrying about typing code into, main.js or TS or whatever. So.
Okay, so I want to kind of kick off a kind of maybe like a process angle on this. So one of the ideas I had written down ahead of time is that to get something done, to actually be able to deliver a result somewhere near a date that whoever needs it, I have found it immensely valuable to just drive with all my might toward the key path from where to something that works, and just, very violently shun any like side paths or polish until the thing works. To like make the program do the one thing that it needs to do to deliver this value that somebody's waiting for, and then start polishing it in 1,000 different ways. Now, this is not always good advice, but I think it's a pretty valuable tool in the toolbox to just relentless focus on making it work. Make it work, then make it right, then make it fast, or make it work, then make it right, then make it pretty, that kind of thing. And obviously there are many factors that could make this sometimes be a bad idea. Thoughts?
I think, like, from a client perspective, if you have someone that's like actually reviewing your final result, I like that idea because, like, for me, I do proof of concepts a lot for MVPs essentially, and like talking about Storybook, I usually do them in stack-less just so it's completely separated from my monorepo. But once you just do like that minimal thing, like you said, get that small bit working, I just take my stack-less link, I send it to whoever needs to look at it real quick and say, hey, is this good? What do I need to improve? Is this what you wanted? And then we can start nailing down like the finer details of, oh, I want it to look this way, or I need this extra bit of functionality, or, oh, not quite like that, but it needs to do this, whatever, right? And then once it's all said and done, you get all your requirements essentially mapped out just by going back and forth and having it be highly iterative. You can actually take that MVP and actually plug it into your monorepo or whatever you're working with, right?
I just wrote that down. Is this what you wanted? Like, make a minimal version and show it to a stakeholder and find out if it's what somebody actually wants before you use up the entire planned schedule to find out at the end.
Yeah, I've talked about before doing little screen grab videos of something that I'm in the process of. Can't really do stackblets a lot for the things that I'm looking at because proprietary code and all of that. But just while I'm still working on it, sometimes before I've even pushed the code to Git, I'll record a video and send it to the stakeholders and say, am I on the right path?
I'm making a note of the video idea. So, Chris, what do you think? Minimum viable feature versus doing it right the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of that iterative approach. The only hard part about that is people have a tendency to not listen when you say, hey, this is a draft. Ignore all the unprettiness, and they tend to focus in on, things that are irrelevant. But if you can get people to understand the concept of, I'm showing you this so that you can see how it works and give feedback, and don't worry about the fact that this bit of styling isn't quite right yet, or this or that, get them to understand the concept of like a first draft. Then yeah, I think that's a useful tool.
Yeah, so a great point there, Chris, that like the culture, the human relationships have to be aligned to support rapid delivery. And it's really easy to kind of have, that guy on a team who poisons the ability of a team to deliver on time by scrutinizing the wrong aspects of the work too early, right? It's important to scrutinize the right aspects of the work, like, is this aiming toward what we actually need? Scrutinize that very early. But, scrutinizing the exact number of pixels wide the button is before you've ascertained whether this button is what anyone actually wants can really torpedo the ability to, like, deliver on time. Yeah. By the way, I had a commenter, a side channel commenter comment that my mechanical keyboard was too audible on the stream. So I apologize for our viewers who don't like the sounds of mechanical keyboards. I recently upgraded to a fully clicky mechanical keyboard, and that might have been a step too far. I might need to go back to one that's a little bit quieter. Oops.
I just embrace it. I enjoy the noise.
So
actually, go ahead.
I posted a link in the chat because what we're talking about is kind of bike shedding. And for those who aren't familiar with the idea, you can follow the link that I just posted there. But the principle is and the example given on that link is you can have a multi-billion-dollar nuclear power plant, and someone has to approve it. And the concepts are so big and so complicated that people won't necessarily be able to focus on the questions that they need to focus on. But maybe there's a little bike shed that's just around the corner, and people know how to conceive of a bike shed. And so you'll end up, when presenting how many billions of dollars should we spend on this, you can theoretically at least end up with people talking about, that bike shed should be a different shade of brown. No, I don't, what, the door's on the wrong side. I'm going to be riding my bike up and I want to come in on the other side. And so you can end up with people focusing on totally the wrong thing. And I have seen people at least talk about weaponizing that they will go into a presentation with intentionally a small bike shed like thing that's on there on a different layer of the graphics, so that they can remove that and still keep all of the actual stuff that they want, that they know no one is ever going to ask about, but they can put in this incredibly trivial wrong thing in there to take up the entire time of the meeting, and then everyone at the end will say, okay, fine, yeah, go ahead and do what you want to do. Just get rid of that little bike shed there.
I've never done the analog of that in a piece of software, but now I think maybe I should just intentionally put in some trivial mistake to draw attention away from the major mistakes in the core of the software.
Yeah, I try not to use my powers for evil, but I'm aware that they could be.
No, bike shedding can actually be quite dangerous, right? So it not only can waste money, but the most extreme variant of this is things like a homeowners association, which is busy scrutinizing each other over minutia and doesn't notice that their building is about to collapse. To use an example from the news recently, it's kind of grim, but yeah, the bike shedding can actually have very real-world disastrous consequences. It's, I think, one of the challenges in leading a meeting is to know what the main things are in the meeting and keep pushing attention back from those. And don't let people bike shed if there's limited time available for discussion. Okay. Well, I have another variant of the previous idea, if we have that one exhausted. So this one is closer to sort of a architecture/process side of things, where we often we help enterprise customers with this. We have, I guess, probably some official advice on this as part of our Angular for Architects class that I have not yet actually been part of that, but I think a person or two here might have been part of that. Chris, I know at least you have. You been part of that yet, Lance?
Mm-hmm.
I have watched Chris do a great job in one of the sessions of the class.
So one of the questions that comes up is kind of take the same thing that I brought up as something on a day or week scale and think about it as a quarter or year scale. Should you build your application first and then go apply the corporate design system to it? Or should you apply the corporate design system as kind of a blocker step by step as you build an application? Thoughts?
I think retrofitting design systems is always incredibly difficult, and everyone expects it to take pretty much zero time. So definitely, if you can get it defined up front, ideally in a way that it's not just, hey, log into this design app and click on each little piece and see what color and pixels it is, but something you can actually pull and share as a global style sheet or actually reusable components, and do that from the beginning. That's going to be the least amount of wasted time. And then you can spend more time focusing on the functionality and not worrying about what it looks like.
What do you think, Lance? Zachary?
From my perspective, actually having done this on a few client projects, is I almost always find it easier if they can provide the design system up front, and then we can make the component library or whatever they want with it. And then from there on out, we just have our core set of whatever that we can pull from whenever we're actually making the functionality. It's kind of like going in with I want to use Angular material, right? Angular material is great, pretty good out of the box, right? go make a proof of concept application pretty fast, get going with it. That's kind of what I want. Is we're going to take the time, get the design system out of the way, and actually create a component library or a set of features or whatever type of components with it, and then just mad dash forward with that to actually get the functionality done.
Lance, what do you think?
This is not something that I've worked on so much. I don't know that I have as much to say about it as Chris and Zachary. It reminds me of one thing that I have done within the last few years is, well, more than once, retrofit NGRX into an existing app. And so it's on a different layer, but it is kind of the same idea of figuring out how after the fact to add a structure to something that was already there. And one of the times that we did it, it's actually Chris and I, before we joined Oasis Digital, we didn't, NGRX was new and we didn't understand it. And it was only because of Kyle's crying baby talk that we really figured things out. And we went back and we retrofitted it and it was great. And another time that I'm thinking of is we thought about NGRX, but the initial version of the app just wasn't complicated enough to need it. And eventually it just grew to need it. And it was kind of painful. There were a couple weeks of trying to write the code in there. And what was also painful about it was continuing to have other work going on while the state management system was being changed underneath. And so that's not a quick branch. That's not a quick PR. And so there's a lot of rebasing and resolving all the merge conflicts while that is going on. But if you follow the right patterns in advance, it doesn't have to be horrible. Parts will always suck, but you can make it less difficult for yourselves if you do it right in the first time. And I think the same thing is probably true on the design systems that you're talking about, but I'm not as sure about that.
One thing, Zachary mentioned material. One thing to be careful of is, be careful that they're not like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead and start with material, and then 2 months later they're like, okay, now we want to fully customize it to look like X, and then you're like, whoa, it doesn't actually work that way.
Yep.
Make sure that they really are buying into it and not just like, oh yeah, sure, you can. That's a starting point, and then they're assuming that they can customize it in ways that they can. So
yeah, on that front, I've had client projects where we use Angular material underneath of our component library. I think multiple times now actually. And one time it went pretty well going over to a design system. We just completely removed Angular material, redid the component library, and then everything still just kind of worked because everyone was already using our core set of components. And the other time catastrophically failed just because the transfer just wasn't really possible. I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but yeah, it basically blew everything up because we had this one system of Angular material that just literally could not transfer. And then we just had to redo all the work from scratch. So it's just wasted effort, kind of. And I feel like that can happen a lot with things. If you overcomplicate it, even something, again, NGRX, just bringing in some tool, some tech that is probably pretty good, but they can overcomplicate things in the beginning and you might go down this bad road with it. And then later on, you just have to refactor everything back out. Be a pain.
So I actually think this is one of those questions with no good answer, because fundamentally each of the two answers that I gave as possibilities are fraught with peril. There are many projects which never did meet their desired design because all the time was used up making the functionality work, and there wasn't time left to go meet the desired design. And there are many projects where the first 3/4 or the first 2/3 of the intended chunks of functionality look approximately correct, but the last third, the thing that would have really made the whole thing pay off, didn't happen because too much time got used up. So I think that's one where you really have to be very humble at the planning stage and acknowledge that failure is not only an option, it's a frequent occurrence, especially if you define anything less than 100% success as failure, and sort of weigh to yourself as a leader, if we ran out of time, which would we rather have happen? Would we rather have less functionality but a closer match to our design system? Or would we rather have a closer match to our design system but less functionality? And And I guess that kind of depends on the business consequences of each of those, I guess, incomplete successes. One idea that the variant that I've heard can most reliably pay off is to adopt, I think Chris, you described this, adopt something off the shelf that's not horribly far from what you really want. And then build your application on that, deliver the key functionality you have to, and once you have secured like the essential success, then maybe that's the time to go back and start customizing. You know, with the understanding you might realize that something you wanted to do actually can't be done as a customization of the base you chose to build on. You know, Angular material is pretty customizable. In fact, you know, search our other channel for a great video about that. It's pretty customizable, but it also is pretty opinionated. Mm-hmm. And there are things that some people may want to do where you might say, well, I guess you could torture Angular material into doing this, but at some point you're going to say, why am I using this base? What I want to build it's nowhere near this base. It's like way over there.
Yeah. I run into, you know, organizations that are large enough to hire whole design teams. You know, sometimes you have, when these things are happening in parallel, sometimes you have like developers over here trying to get going when using something like material or any other component library, and then you have a design team off in another world using really high-level apps like Adobe XD or any of those things that are completely unrelated to the actual, you know, code base or frameworks that you're using. And so they're creating designs out of context. They have no context as to how difficult it is to do any of those things, and they're just starting from scratch with no concept of, you know, what some material or whatever other component library does, you know, as a base. And so you have these things they're just drawing whatever they want to over there, and then the developers are expected to just implement it, and it's like, it's just so disconnected, you know. And then there's this whole long effort of, as a developer, it's on the developer to go in and do this translation, which is not trivial, of going into one of these programs, again, clicking on each little element. Maybe they don't even have like a page of buttons and a page of whatever. Maybe they just have screen mock-ups, and you're trying to figure out, well, what's the rule? And so you're just trying to interpret these things off of screen mock-ups and then translate that into, you know, a coherent set of CSS or stuff like that. And it's so much work. It's like the designers spent all this time doing this in this app, and then there's so much extra work to like actually get it into something usable. I don't know what the answer is, but it just doesn't seem to work well.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many perils there, right?
Yeah.
You know, at the same time, so the way I've heard it described is there's a couple different ways to do this. The efficient way is to get your design system, which can get kind of a placeholder for any kind of common library of code or design, nailed down and great, and then go do your application. That's like the correct way to do it. The problem is that the only actual successful way to do it is to build some common code or some common design or common libraries in conjunction with building the first couple of applications that rely on them. Because if you don't, then the likelihood of hitting the target of something that can be used to build on goes down quite drastically. So I think that's another case where there isn't really like a good right answer. But if you want to, you know, looking back to our key topic, if you want to ship on time, it requires, you know, serious humility and decision making on, if something has to give, what should that be? And then make your decision of how to plan your project informed by your intentional decision of what you'd be willing to give up if you had to give something up.
On that front of efficiency, I've had some projects that do a pretty good job of that, where they have like a core set of designs that they're going to be using for like an MVP or whatever they need for their component library. And then like as things are actually being used in real applications and whatnot to actually build stuff, then they start creating like an extra list of like, oh, we need this kind of component, or we need this kind of component, or it'd be really nice to have this, whatever, tweaked. And then you start going back into the iterative process of like maybe redesigning things or adding new stuff. And then you can kind of just keep that full circle going while people are actually still being able to build actual stuff and not just waiting around doing nothing while things are being designed or whatever. So it helps a lot because at least you have the iteration of going back and forth a little bit more and things are actually getting solved and tweaked. But
Yeah. And if you can get to the point you're tweaking, that's good, right? That's where you want to end up. You want to end up when you're at the point that you're running to the end of your schedule, whether that's a schedule for a day, for a week, for a month, for a whole project. If you're tweaking as you near the end of the schedule, it means you did something reasonably right. Okay, I've got another variant on this to permute to here. So, you're hustling along, trying to deliver feature, hoping to deliver on this week's iteration, assuming whatever Friday, whatever. You discover some technical debt. Oops. What are the trade-offs for missing, either not shipping the thing this week we thought we were going to, or working extra, gross, versus letting the technical debt stay there, let the thing stay messy, and fix it in the next feature.
Yeah, and the project I'm on currently, we have an epic where the client has allowed us to control this one epic that we call our tech debt epic. And when things like that come out, we create our own stories for that, and then we get back to them. Sometimes the product owner will pick things out specifically from that, but other times it's just the things that bother us that we really want to go back to when we have some time to work on them. So unless it were something that really caused a problem, in the scenario you described, I would probably document it and move on.
Yeah, and I think that has to be the right default if you want to get in that groove of delivering and being done on time. Yeah, you end up having to defer. And if you have the kind of, obviously, you're talking about working at the kind of customer leadership or, stakeholder leadership on a project that has, some wisdom to, acknowledge and have room to go back and do those things. We've also occasionally seen projects where if you don't fix something today, it's probably never going to be fixed. And I'd say it's a lot harder to deal with that situation than in the kind of better case you're talking about, Lance. I guess not all customers can be as wonderful as ours. Shout out to it.
Sometimes you gotta sneak it in. Really.
I've heard the sneak it in idea.
And somebody's got to approve the time to work on it, or I can just fix it while I'm doing a feature and get it in there.
Yeah, I know that. Of course, I've been in this career a while. I've snuck in improvements that the person who should have been asking for them wasn't asking for. And I would argue that, to the extent it's good for you as the implementer to do that, then do that. But, fundamentally, the motivation to lead well, to plan well, to have good priorities really does have to come from, I guess, what do they call it? The gold donor, to use one of the metaphors for this. Is that whoever kind of owns a project in the financial sense, who is paying for it, they really do have to be on board with the level of quality, or you're not going to be able to sneak in a higher level of quality fundamentally.
For me, it kind of depends how big of a refactoring it might be. Because if it's something small, I'm just going to do it for my own sanity.
Oh, I was thinking of things big enough big enough that they might make you not get done today, not get done this week, feel tempted to put in extra work beyond what the person is asking for. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
That's fair. I was on our project, we sometimes even just sneak in things during the actual sprint itself as like a full story or defect or however you want to name it, right? Just to refactor something before we can even do our story.
So
Just because we need
I don't think
improvements.
that's a sneak in. I think that's you had what appeared to be one chunk of work, and you realized it's actually two chunks of work.
True.
And,
I mean, it
and
still comes down to planning though, because like we might go over velocity or whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, there are so many kind of methodology things. Approximately every project that uses every corporate project uses something that is a variant of Agile. Many are a variant of Scrum. Almost all are a locally modified version. That it's really hard to give like universal advice because I don't know that I've ever seen two teams using exactly the same process, even at the same company. There's usually not two teams using it. They're usually, well, over here we kind of count them this way instead. Yeah, so Zachary, you mentioned it being over velocity. I kind of got a chuckle out of that, right? Because out of all the things that are ever complained about, that one's pretty far down the list.
Actually, I was at a company for only 6 months before I was applying for other companies, but they actually had a rule. They refused to believe that one QA tester couldn't test all the stories done by 2 developers in iteration. The guy in charge was just super set that there was this exact ratio of 2 to 1, and all stories done in iteration had to be tested in the next iteration. Set rules. So the only answer was that if we were the 2 developers were only allowed to do a certain amount of work in an iteration because the QA tester, who was ridiculously thorough, could not keep up. So we weren't allowed to do more work than she could test because the manager refused to admit that it takes more than one tester to keep up with the 2 developers. So I would work for about, I don't know, half or 3/4 of an iteration, and then I was literally not allowed to pick up any more work. So it was the most ridiculous thing ever. So it's the only place I've ever been where you're just like, no, you can't do more. That'll just mess up our schedule.
So the interesting thing about that is that on the one hand, from one point of view, that's the most ludicrous thing you can ever imagine, right? But then I can imagine a person who's been through a certain kind of training around, like a constraints-based model of optimizing overall organizational results. I can easily imagine somebody saying, well, actually what we should do is we should figure out what is the bottleneck and have everybody try to, work at that bottleneck pace rather than creating backlogs of work here and there. So I can actually imagine somebody, especially somebody who came from like a manufacturing world before that, maybe thinking that was reasonable, even though I guess, from your and my point of view, that's pretty silly.
Yeah, I mean, this tester was working like 60-hour weeks. And then there were 2 developers who were working like 30 hours a week because we had nothing else to do. I mean, it was nuts. But yeah, I mean, either scale back your development team or add more testers, but then they're just paying us to sit there. So
I want to dig into another technical aspect of this notion of how to ship on time. Sometimes things don't go perfectly. Sometimes there's parallel work. One thing that I have heard, I've personally experienced this many times, and I've heard about it in close to 100% of our customers' projects. And that is there's some new thing being built that has a client part and a server part. In an idealized world, the server part would be like perfectly well crafted to support the exact use case, and then the client development would come in and happen. But it's more common that those things are happening typically kind of somewhat in parallel. Decisions are still being made of how the feature should exactly work. Server implementation is not ready yet. Perhaps some data layer is not fully ready yet. The client application is just now getting started. I know there are techniques that we have used here to avoid getting blocked, to try to keep delivering, to deliver on time, to meet and exceed expectations. What are some ideas that come to mind for doing that in a situation where there's cross dependencies between groups and everybody's waiting for the other group to do their part?
And the situation that I'm more familiar with is that the UI is just trailblazing ahead, and the back end is either falling behind or they just can't keep up for whatever reason. Like not trying to like point fingers or anything.
We got to take a pause, Zachary. The reason that happens is because companies hire Oasis Digital. Follow, like, look at the logo, hire us. They hire Oasis Digital to help with their UI layer. And although, like everyone else, we start out in a bit of a slog, once we've been at it a while, we get deep mastery, and the stuff we are working on just drives ahead. And, you know, I tried to say it mockingly, but I have seen this exact thing happen on at least 10 of our customers over the last decade, where after we have been there a while, the layer we are working on is just flying ahead. Anyway, so now that this commercial break is through,
Right.
Please continue.
That is a good side topic though, just like mastery of your stuff can really help with efficiency. But back to this. So in that case, if the UI is really far ahead, multiple projects I've seen us basically just ad hoc make our own server implementation that more or less kind of matches what we're expecting. So we can like do E2E tests, we can do all this extra stuff with this running in the background. We can serve up a real application. And then we just kind of hope the backend matches us to an extent or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, there's going to be some eventual path where we have to try and make everything actually match up with the real backend eventually. But it does get us to a starting point, right? Like we're still able to do our HTTP stuff. We're still able to do all that stuff on the front end, real, and then just at least get some type of mock data or whatever back in. So.
I've even used, the Tour of Heroes app. They still have that.
Right. Yeah.
It uses that in-memory web API module. I've even used that like at the very beginning of a project. And you can I think you can actually specify which URLs it intercepts just to get something going, It's a basic REST API. If you really have no idea what the final thing is going to be like, that's just like the simplest, easiest way to like just get going with something.
So I've heard of folks, I have not personally done this one, so maybe somebody else here will say, but they get up and running where they're doing all their development in Cypress, and they use the Cypress feature to stub out their back end while they start getting their UI flowing through. And they figure by the time they need to run it outside of Cypress, they'll be able to pivot to connect to a real API. And the nice thing about that is then you have already built the stuff you need to have a fast, smooth Cypress-based workflow.
I think that sounds like a great idea. I haven't had that.
I've heard of somebody doing it. I haven't done that one myself.
Yeah, it sounds pretty great. Like I think one of the other benefits of the Cypress was that you can have the Cypress test reload you to the exact point in the app that you're trying to modify, and so it saves time of you clicking through and stuff.
Yeah.
So it sounds great. I haven't.
It's pretty great.
But where I could try that and take advantage of it. But it sounds awesome.
Yeah. I've also heard of having a car that doesn't spontaneously burst into flames, but these are just theoretical things. I've never experienced them myself.
We're like watching the environment in Lance's shot for any signs of flame or smoke.
Yeah, that's not flame. That's just a kitty.
It's just a cat. There you go. I have some cats, but they are not in here right now. So they've gotten this terrible habit of standing as close as they can to me on my desk and like getting all up in my face. It's like, I'm trying to work. What are you doing here? And
I mean, at least they don't sit on your keyboard yet, hopefully.
I push them off of that regularly. Since I got the back channel message that my keyboard is too loud, now I'm going to need to. You'll be able to hear, I guess, if they're working on my keyboard. Okay, let me look at the notes here. Okay, so that was all of the things we had ahead of time that I had to kind of talk through. So now that we've run out of pre-prepared ideas, what are some more ideas? Just tips, ideas, cheat codes, anything to get your work done on time, to not feel guilty because you left work at 5 or whatever your stop time is and went and did something else.
For me, honestly, a lot of it might just be like having a good tool belt with RxJS, because a lot of Angular is RxJS, and there's a lot of testing and everything else that needs to go around for RxJS. So there's either practicing it to a minimal level or just having like a good set of like operators or whatever that are in your tool belt really helps, because you can just say, oh, I have this feature, I need to do this thing. Maybe I need to pull some state from somewhere or whatever, right? And you're like, okay, I need to use this operator. You just go do it, and it more or less should theoretically work. And then you can just unit test it and then go see if it works in the application, whatever. Kind of harkening back to Chris's point earlier of like, sometimes I don't even boot up my application, right? If I'm working on RxJS stuff, like I just do it. I'm decently confident that it might work, and then I actually go through the unit testing process with it, actually making sure you're testing with actual data, whatever, that it does in fact work. And then I go look at my application, I'm like, yay, magic.
So I'm a huge fan of RxJS, but I will generalize that more. Like, spend time getting good at your tools.
That's it.
I mean, if you spend a little time, if each time you hit a little rough edge on a tool, you spend just a couple of minutes each time trying to understand that little piece of your tool, and then you compound that of a career potentially lasting decades, you'll end up really amazingly good at your tools. And being good at your tools is incredibly helpful to finish your work on time. Chris, this is the point where you tell us that the key to being good at your tools is to choose a different IDE than I do.
Right. I actually ran that today. I'm having difficulty because I have to run my client's stuff in Windows, and I'm a Mac user, and I'm a WebStorm on Mac user, and I actually got Windows 11 running in a VM. But while my M1 Mac can handle WebStorm like 10 instances, no problem, Windows 11 VM on my Mac, not so much. So,
would you consider using a lesser computer if you had to?
I'm not there yet. But that's the thing though. Like, I'm used to doing the keyboard on my Mac. I'm used to, it's like I could open up the Windows laptop. So, like, I am going to great lengths to try to figure out how to keep using WebStorm on Mac because, yeah, the amount of time I'm spending, I feel like figuring out a way to work around this is still better than how awkward it's going to be for me trying to write code. So, like, and I tried opening up VS Code in the Windows VM, and I'm like, I don't know how to go to the end of a line. I don't have a home.
So Chris, this is a total diversion from the point of the topic here. But since we only have a few live users, and users later can just skip ahead a couple minutes, I'm going to tell you about something amazing.
Okay.
VS Code is a client-server application. You could run the GUI, the VS Code part that you interact with, on your Mac, and run the backend over in some VM on the same or even a different computer. And then you would have all the behaviors you expect around keyboard and everything would be because that's on your end of VS Code. Exactly. And then the back end, where it actually talks to the files, would be on the other end of VS Code. I actually use this in a different scenario. I occasionally test stuff that needs very substantial computing resources. And so I'll fire up a 64 core, or even I think one time I did a 128 core VM on AWS. And ran the VS Code backend there. And this sounds like a lot of work, but once you go read the instructions on how to do it, it's actually just a couple commands. It's extremely easy.
Okay.
And I think you might, this is like, again, this is the sort of thing that is a danger to shipping on time because you can go down a rabbit hole of tools. But that could be pretty cool. You could even run the Windows stuff on the Windows laptop and have it like, running its fan across the room or something.
Yeah. The point I'm at this afternoon was I've given up, and I actually have the repo pulled down on my Mac side and on the Windows VM, and I was just planning to commit things to my branch and then pull it down on the VM to run it. But
whereas the thing I always thought would avoid that, and in fact, when you bring up a terminal in VS Code, it's actually a terminal on the other end.
Okay. No, I still have to figure out how to use VS Code. It's okay. But at least I can go to the end of a line. That's right. It's like a small thing, but that is huge.
So how do you go to the end of the line?
Well, on the Mac, it's a command arrow, no matter what program you're in.
I have a. Oh, that's okay. Huh. So on my separate keyboard, I actually have an end button, which is which goes to the end of the line.
Yeah, I don't have a home or end key. So
Yeah, on my previous work laptop, there was not an end key, and that was infuriating to me.
yeah, so the Oasis laptop that I did use for a while, it also did not have an unawkward way of going the beginning or end of the line. So I actually remapped the keys so that like the control key on the right side was actually like a home key or end key. I don't know, because the keys were in weird places. So I like actually went so far as to do that. So it would be like the same ergonomics as hitting command arrow on my Mac.
I think we might have to start like a custom mechanical keyboard club at work. Get everybody addicted to, fully custom mapped. So shout out to Vim users in our audience, of which there are surely maybe some. $sign is how you get to the end of a line. And such as it has been when I started using Vim some years ago. Okay, more ideas. We're over an hour, so if we run out of ideas, we'll just punt. But more ideas for finishing on time, shipping on time, go home with a job well done.
I'm late for a meeting, so
you should probably go to that meeting.
Yeah, bye.
Bye,
Bye,
Chris.
Chris. Okay. Do we have any more ideas for shipping on time?
Changing the time zone on your laptop. Give yourself an extra hour. No, that probably doesn't work.
Yeah, that's almost the opposite, right? Like, because the problem is you gave it the extra hour. It didn't give you the extra hour.
Yeah.
This might sound slightly silly, but just having like a good DevOps experience, I guess, and like some people don't have control over that. Like on a lot of our projects, we're like the ones actually setting up a lot of it because we're so integrated with NX or Angular or whatever that we can just do it.
Optimize your CI, right?
Yeah.
Your CI is optimized.
For us, it's not done unless it's been reviewed, it's been PR'd, it's been all this stuff, and it's actually merged. So like that process takes a while. Like if you're just like, oh cool, I got my stuff committed, I'm done for today. That's not where it ends, right? You got to get it reviewed, you got to get it through the pipeline, all that stuff.
So a way as a team to try to deliver on time is when your fellow developer needs a review, get them that review as fast as you reasonably can. I mean, don't literally stop partway through typing an identifier in something you're coding to do a code review, hopefully. But a low latency on reviews can really help.
Especially if you have to go back and forth, right?
Yeah.
Like if they leave comments and you got to address them, you're like, I can't do this at like 6 p.m.
Had a related question come up. It's slightly tangential, but I think it's okay. How many times would you go back and forth on a review before you'd say, hey, let's have a live meeting review instead of a typing comments review?
Good question. For me, I feel like usually if the PR is in a decent state, like you leave a comment, there's usually not much to discuss about it, hopefully. Or it's just like, hey, tweak this thing or whatever. But if there's like a larger tangential, like, I don't think we're doing this right type of thing, I usually either just like sit down and like actually start PMing them or like whatever tool, or actually just sit down for a call. Because if you're like trying to restructure things, that's where stuff gets kind of messy.
One of my teammates has recently started doing something in the last couple of weeks where if there's a bigger review that he wants to make, instead of making comments in a bunch of different places, he'll create a sub-branch and put a PR in that is just, these are the things that I think should be changed for this PR. And then we'll look at it. You might have a little debate back and forth, but then, in both cases that this has happened recently, the author of the original PR cherry picks his branch. Maybe, having to squash, rebase, that sort of thing, but cherry picks it, adds that to the original PR. And so that has been a way to short circuit some of the conversation because it's literally there in code.
I've done a similar thing where if I have a lot to explain, I will do a screencast video review instead of, 'cause sometimes that's just easier to absorb for somebody than like, burying them under an avalanche of 2-sentence comments entering 75 2-sentence comments into a into the PR or individual lines of code. I've heard the advice that like 3 times should be the limit. If you go back and forth 3 times, you definitely should have a meeting instead. But that was just a guideline I heard. I don't know that it's, I don't know how universally that's a good idea.
I know we actually implemented what Lance is talking about, where they create like a separate branch saying like, here's the changes we would do on some client projects, where like our people on our team are actually the ones doing reviews, and then we have a whole bunch of other teams actually just committing code separate from OD. And like we have a pretty high bar for a lot of stuff a lot of times. So sometimes we're not going to leave like 500 comments on your thing saying like tweak this. We literally just go do it, give them the branch, say consume this. If you have questions, come back to us. We'll try and explain everything we can, but it's going to be way faster to do this instead of like waiting a week for you to like try and slog through all of our comments.
Yeah, this is a consequence. The kind of engagements we often do often have us as sort of, hey, can you get some people that are really good at reviewing big complex changes with a complex tech stack. And so we will often spend a disproportionate amount of our time on a project reviewing. Yeah. I like the idea of like the kind of the additional PR though. That's kind of clever. Okay. Anything else? I mean, we've talked about probably 50 different tips of various kinds to.
Yeah. One thing though is I'm not sure how many of these things are actually about code to finish the week software development, and how much are just good development practice in general.
Well, cheat code was a cheat code to act as clickbait to get people to come and watch. But I would say that the things that you would do to ship in a timely way are a subset of the things you should generally do. Yeah. There are probably some things that wouldn't come up in the timeliness that would come up in a broader discussion. Trying to think. I can think of one more thing, which is the earlier you have in-depth conversations on what a thing really needs to do, the more likely you are to ship on time, because the less wasted effort you're likely to have, right? Like if you have a day of work to do and you have a day to do it and everything goes perfectly, you're in great shape. But if you have a day of work to do, then you have 3 days of wasted work to do on the way to doing that days of work, then you're in really bad shape. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up, unless you have something else. Well, thank you to our. I think at one point we had several handfuls of live viewers this time. We've kind of petered out to just a handful now at the end. So thank you, the handful of you hanging on to the very end, and hope this is helpful to everybody out there.
Yep. See you next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.